Coming up on this edition of Front and Center, the terrorist attacks of 9/11 have led to a wide rift between Christians and Muslims worldwide. But a series of open letters between Muslim and Christian scholars have found common ground between the two faiths. We'll talk to two of the scholars who signed those letters and what they hope comes from this new dialogue. Christian and Muslim relations is Front and Center. Hello and welcome to Front and Center. I'm Ray Hardman. Since the terrorist attacks of 9/11, the divide between Christians and Muslims worldwide has grown substantially. I just wrote down a few examples. Back in 2006, Danish cartoons depicting the Prophet Muhammad angered Muslims worldwide. Muslim Americans experienced a racist backlash immediately after the 9/11 attacks, and Pope Benedict XVI's comments about Islam and holy war during a lecture have all contributed to an atmosphere of distrust and, at the extremes, hatred and fear. Last fall, some 138 Muslim clerics and scholars hoped to change that. They signed their name to an open letter to Christians worldwide, calling for peace and mutual respect between the two faiths. Here's the opening sentence from the letter. It's called A Common Word Between Us and You. Muslim and Christians together make up well over half of the world's population. Without peace and justice between these two religious communities, there can be no meaningful peace in the world. The future of the world depends on peace between Muslims and Christians. Now, 1 month later, members of the Yale Divinity School wrote a response to the Muslim letter and published it in a full-page ad in the New York Times. Just last month, Muslim and Catholic scholars met at the Vatican to organize a 3-day seminar on Islamic-Christian relations that will be held in November. The Pope will attend those discussions. Joining me now is Dr. Ingrid Mattson. She's a professor of Islamic Studies and Christian-Muslim relations at the Hartford Seminary and one of the Muslim scholars who signed A Common Word. She's joined by Joseph Cumming, who co-wrote the Christian response to A Common Word. He's the director of the Reconciliation Program at Yale Center for Faith and Culture. Also joining us is Father Stephen Pavignano, an associate pastor at St. Patrick St. Anthony Church in Hartford. Everybody, welcome to Front and Center.
Thank you.
Ray.
Dr. Mattson, how and why did this letter come about?
This was a response to, as you say, an increasing sense of a divide, whether that is the reality or not with the majority of Muslims and Christians in the world. Certainly, our impression from the media is that there's this great distrust and conflict. And what we wanted to show is that, first of all, it doesn't have to be that way. And second, that there's no essential reason why Christians and Muslims should be in a situation of conflict. That what we have in common, some essential ethical principles of our faith, are enough to make it possible for us to get along, and that not only is that a possibility, but it's an ethical responsibility. As you noted in your opening remarks, A Common Word begins with a factual statement, saying that if we don't get along, since we are the majority of the world's population, the world won't be at peace. And if our faiths are to be about anything else, certainly at least they are to be about bringing a more peaceful and just world.
The opening sentence is so revolutionary to me. When I read it for the first time, I thought, this is really a departure. Is this something different, something unique coming from the Islamic community?
It's nothing new in terms of theological principles. The principles of A Common Word are grounded in the revelation itself, the Quranic revelation. They're grounded in the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. And certainly historically, although we've seen many times that Christians and Muslims have been in conflict politically, there also have been at least as many times, if not more, when they've lived together productively as neighbors, as citizens, as friends, even intermarriage. So, but I do think that what's different is that we live in an age in which we need to be very public in our beliefs, because those who wish to cause tension and violence and discord between us are very public in their statements and are leading people astray and are leading people towards a path that's not good for any of us in the world. So the difference is I think this very strong statement that we are going to stand up publicly, despite any opposition there may be, and articulate that this is at the core of our faith, that we share these essential, fundamental values and beliefs with Christians.
Mm-hmm. How has this been received by Muslims worldwide? I would imagine the extreme forms of Islam would reject this immediately, but by and large, what's the response been?
The response has been very good. I certainly, speaking from the perspective of an American Muslim, what I've seen is that there's so much excitement around this. It's the kind of leadership that many people on the grassroots level, the congregational level, have been waiting for. They've felt this sense of urgency, of wanting to do something, and now there's a sense that initiatives at the local level can now connect to something broader. Of course, in some places in the world, there are authoritarian regimes who have their own political reasons for accepting it or not. But what's amazing is you look at a place like Saudi Arabia, and just recently the King of Saudi Arabia for the first time mentioned a desire to have interfaith engagement, not just with Christians but even with Jews. So the impact has been significant in the sense that everyone's had to respond. Even Osama bin Laden has had to respond, because in a statement that was released recently, he didn't mention a common word, but he mentioned engagement with the Pope, with Christianity, and I think that shows that it's successful, because if he feels that he has to respond to it, I would say that he thinks it's a threat to his ideology.
Mm-hmm. Father Stephen Pavignano, I want to get your reaction when this letter came across your desk and you read it. What was your first reaction?
Joy. As a Franciscan, Francis of Assisi wanted to go to the Holy Land. That was in 1209. Unfortunately, the Christian community and the Muslim community were fighting over the Holy Land. Francis walked through the battlefield. He wasn't taking sides. He was taken captive. We're told that for 3 days to a week, he spent it in the Muslim camp, speaking with people, praying. And because of his truth that he didn't want either side to do battle, Franciscans were given free passage in and out of the Holy Land. So for me, it's a great joy that my ancestor almost had a way of starting this, and that it helps us overcome some ignorance, that we don't understand sometimes our own religious preferences, our own religious biases, our own religious beliefs, to the point where at times we have not listened to each other. When I was at the University of Georgia during the first Gulf War, I have a friend from Algeria, Fazi, and he came up to me one day and he said, "Steve, I don't understand this. I'm African. Why are people calling me these names?" All they knew is that he was Muslim. And we have an ignorance. He said, "I'm not even Middle Eastern, let alone being Iraqi." He says, "And people are mistreating me because of my religion." We've allowed people to hijack our religious beliefs. So when I received this letter, it was great joy, because it acknowledges, yes, we have differences, but we have one God who created all of us, and now we must work at understanding what our God wants us to do. Mm-hmm. I think it's a great step forward. Yeah,
Joseph Cumming, I want to get your reaction and how Yale Divinity School and your colleagues got involved.
Well, we certainly also reacted similarly with joy, and we felt that this was an unprecedented moment, not in the sense that, as Professor Mattson said, it was not a new doctrine coming out of the Muslim world. These are doctrines that are there in the Quran and there in the Hadith, but rather that this letter, which was signed by really a who's who of most of the top Muslim leaders in the world, from all over the world, and from every major sect of Islam, addressing a letter which was extremely constructive to the Christian leaders of the world, and focusing on the principles of love of God and love of neighbor. And in fact, the Muslim letter engaged in some very serious and respectful exegesis of the Jewish and Christian sacred texts in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, talking about love of God and love of neighbor, and then Jesus' exegesis of those texts in the Gospel of Mark, as you mentioned. And we felt this was just a very, very exciting opportunity which needed to be responded to in an appropriate way. And so we tried to draft a response that would express both our warm welcome of this Muslim initiative and also bear witness to what we understand about what Jesus taught about love of God and love of neighbor. And that response that we wrote, then we began getting emails from a variety of Christian leaders saying, "Can I sign this too?" It was initially just a group of us at Yale Divinity School who wrote it, but we began getting one email after another. And as that began to gather momentum, the reason we decided to go ahead and publish it in the New York Times, as you said, is that we had ended up with more or less a who's who of top Christian leaders who were signing this Christian response to the Muslim letter. In particular, top mainline Protestant and evangelical Protestant leaders, along with a number of Protestant, Catholic, and Orthodox leaders. And again, they're really a who's who. The head of the World Evangelical Alliance, the head of the National Association of Evangelicals.
I saw Robert Schuller signed as well.
Robert Schuller signed. Rick Warren signed, and mainline Protestants like John Thomas, the head of the United Church of Christ, and I could go on and on.
Sure.
With very prominent leaders who signed, and this really has created a tremendous momentum of opportunity with really a very broad spectrum of the top tier of Muslim leaders and a very broad spectrum of the top tier of Christian leaders saying, let's talk together about loving God and loving one another. And what does that mean in practice? What will it look like on the ground if we really were to love each other the way our sacred texts call us to do?
I want to just read just a section from your letter, your open letter, called Loving God and Neighbor Together. It starts, we want to begin by acknowledging that in the past, in the Crusades and in the present, e.g. in the excesses of war on terror, many Christians have been guilty of sinning against our Muslim neighbors. Before we shake your hand in responding to your letter, we ask forgiveness of the All-Merciful One and of the Muslim community around the world. Why did you include this apology?
Well, we included that apology for the reason we gave just in the sentence right before that, and that is that this is what Jesus taught us to do. That Jesus said, if you're in conflict with someone else and you've wronged them and they've wronged you, take the log out of your own eye first before you try to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. And I think really the crisis in relations between the Muslim world and the West, between Muslims and Christians that you referred to at the beginning of the program, I think has put into relief for Christians an issue that previously we were able to ignore, and that is the Christian faith primarily a civilizational identity, a tribal identity? We're the Christians, they're the Muslims? Or is it primarily about discipleship to Jesus Christ? Because if it's primarily a civilizational, cultural, tribal identity, then that has certain implications for saying, hey, we're not going to apologize to them until they apologize to us, and they've done bad things to us. But if the Christian faith is primarily about following Jesus Christ, well, Jesus says, take the logs out of your own eyes first before you try to take the specks out of other people's eyes. Jesus says, see how I lay down my life in love for others. You should follow me in laying down your life in love for others. And so, obviously for all Christians, it's a little bit of both. Their Christian faith is partly a cultural, civilizational identity and partly about following Jesus Christ. But the crisis that you described is forcing us to decide which is primary for us, because that'll lead us in different directions in how we respond to the Muslim community. Yeah.
Dr. Mattson, I wanted you've been nodding your head here. I wanted to give you the chance to pop in here.
Well, I think what I appreciate about the response is that it subverts this tendency that we all have to conveniently begin history where we would like it to begin. You started it when you started the Crusades, or you started it on 9/11, or, we begin our narrative with the place where we have been wronged. And the reality is that we've all been wrong, very wrong, at various times in history. We have used our faith, we've used the name of God immorally and sinfully to hurt others. That's not all we've done. There are also, beautiful examples of people who have lived lives of faithful lives, both Christians and Muslims, of mercy and compassion and kindness. But we've got to get beyond this this reversion, this constant reversion to being the victim, the injured party, who selectively begin the story of our interaction at the place where we have the most grievances.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Let's explore these two basic principles, and if we can go ahead with that graphic, that'd be great. Here are words from the Quran. God says in the Holy Quran, "So invoke the name of thy Lord and devote thyself to him with a complete devotion." Now the Prophet Muhammad says, "None of you has faith until you love for your neighbor what you love for yourself." Now from the Bible, almost the same words, "And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength." This is the first commandment. And the second like it is this: "You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." Are these two principles sound enough to open up a dialogue between the two faiths?
Well, they certainly are central to the Christian faith, and the Christian community is welcoming with joy the Muslim leadership, saying this is central to our faith too. Obviously, Jesus spoke those words in response to a question about what is the greatest commandment. So this is obviously extremely important. And so there's certainly sound principles. Obviously, we need to move into talking about what does it mean in practice to love one another as we love ourselves, because Christians and Muslims have a history of not loving one another as we love ourselves. Also, both Muslims and Christians have a history of not loving Jews the way we love ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so we have to think, what would it mean in practice for us really to love each other and to love Jews and people of other religions and no religion as we love ourselves? And those are difficult questions, but I think they're the right questions that we need to be asking and answering.
Yeah. When we talk about love of neighbor, both from Islamic and Christianity, are we talking about even love for someone who is not of the same faith?
Absolutely, and certainly in the Islamic case, it's always been interpreted this way, that the statement of the Prophet Muhammad is about our humanity. I mean, any other human being. And what's important in his statement, and basically this is the golden rule, this is the universal rule of reciprocity that we find in all the great religions. But in the Islamic case, what's important from my perspective is that ethical behavior is a hallmark and is a sign of your faith. These two things can't be separated, so that our faith should not be an identity. It's not a badge that we wear that gives us rights, but in fact it's something that we can hope to attain through this devotion to God and service to others, compassionate service and empathy towards others. And that's very important because, as Professor Cummings has said, so often our faith becomes identity politics. And in the era of the modern nation state, that hasn't lessened. It's gotten worse in many ways. I have a lot of hope that younger people who have a more global identity, who seem to be increasingly oriented more towards an ethical orientation, a feeling of responsibility, what do they need to do in this world, will catch on to this and will show us maybe the way and do better than we've done.
Mm-hmm. Father Stephen, did you want to comment there?
Yeah, I think the similarity, not only of the thought, but almost of the wording, as we believe that these are inspired, without getting into a discussion of how or what. But they are the same because we believe in God. Mm. And I think one of the problems we have, which has led us into this social problem at times, is we've forgotten that we are a spiritual people. Whether you have one religion or another or no religion, we all believe in common that we're brothers and sisters because there is but one Creator. And if we can start to recapture that, and not just, which seems to be one of our weaknesses as human beings, is not that we hold in common, where are we different? It seems that we almost have this nature that we come at each other wanting to fight. And I think in the common word, the Muslim community has offered to us and the Christian community saying, we have to change. and they named it, and hopefully we're responding to it. And being able to say to our own folks, we have to learn about our brothers and sisters who see things maybe a little differently. Out of our own church here in Hartford, our Women of Hope group with the Muslim community for 4 or 5 years now, have been meeting very simply to get to know each other. Then we had this great celebration of the common word, thanking God. And then a couple of weeks ago, the Muslim community came and shared with us the joy of the Hajj. That they came and showed us slides and told us of their spiritual experiences. And from the Catholic community, what we heard from our own people was, you know, you changed the name of the location, and our people come back from our holy places saying the same thing. And I think it's related to the fact that we all believe in the one God. And so it's a point where we can make a new start. We can and we have to apologize because we're going to move forward and we're not going to carry all that baggage with us. It won't work in the future.
A lot has been made of this meeting coming up in November between Muslim clerics and representatives from the Vatican. Is this a revolutionary step for this Pope, especially given his previous record as Cardinal Ratzinger?
Yeah, I think so. Probably should say this, but won't be the first time. I think the Holy Father's learning to stop being the theologian and becoming a pastor. Where before that was his role to defend the faith.
Right.
Now he is the pastor, and he's learning how to become a pastor universally. And so it will be somewhat formal. That's still where we are. The discussions will still be at, if you will, upper level. But I think it is a positive step forward, that this came about so quickly, not only that, yes, we want to, but here's a date that we can agree on, I think says that this isn't something to say, yes, we'll do at some point in the future, and to build on it. And I think it'll help many of us who've been working on our relationships. In this country, for a good number of years, there's a Mid-Atlantic, Midwest, and a West Coast dialogue between Catholics and Muslims that have been going on for a long time. But it's always been kind of quiet. But now I think with this national and international movement, people will start feeling more confident to be able to speak. And I think it'll roll. I think it'll move forward. Well,
Joseph, Dr. Mattson, I want to get you involved here because what advice would you have for either side in this meeting if we're talking about the two basic principles of love of God and love of neighbor as a starting point? Where do you go from there when you start sitting down with these people?
Well, I think a basic principle of dialogue, I wouldn't presume to lecture the Vatican or the Muslim leaders organizing that. But, you know, some of the basic principles of dialogue, there's a beautiful verse in the book of Proverbs that says, whoever gives an answer before listening, it's folly to that person and a disgrace. And I think there is a tendency in the relations between Muslims and Christians for us to pronounce about the other people before we've listened to what they have to say. And obviously, we need to listen more than we speak. The other thing that I think is always a very important principle in interfaith dialogue is that when you talk about the other people's faith, that you talk about it in a way that if they were there, they'd say, yeah, that's what we believe. That you don't describe their faith for them in a way that they say, that's not what I believe. There's a lot of misrepresenting and stereotyping going around in the Muslim community, in the Christian community, in the Jewish community towards one another's faiths. And we need to let other people tell us what their faith means to them and ask them respectful questions. Is that really what it means to you? So, for example, the Muslim letter talked about love of neighbor. And in the Christian response that we wrote at Yale that was signed by the 300 Christian leaders, we said, okay, one thing that's very important to Christian understanding of love you asked about is love for the other who's different, love for the person who's not of the same religion, unconditionality of love that Jesus taught about, God's love for us and the love that we should have for each other, that it should be unconditional. We love our friends and we love our enemies. We love our neighbors, including neighbors who are foreign and different from us in the parable of the Good Samaritan. And we wanted to know, is that what the Muslims believe? Some Christians have said, no, that's not what the Muslims believe. We felt like, let the Muslims speak for themselves and tell us, is that how you understand love?
Yeah. We've got about 45 seconds left. Dr. Mattson, I want you to have the last word here on the same lines of the question I asked.
Well, I tend to believe that, first of all, absolutely God is in control of things, and we are only doing our best to try to serve His purposes. And so what I'd like to see is primarily at the high level for those leaders to model some of the behaviors that Joseph's talking about. I think that's the best thing they can do, not necessarily come to some conclusions, some policy decisions, but to model what is correct interaction. And so that throughout the world, throughout the communities where there are people who are interested, and where there are also people who want to disrupt this increasing engagement, they know that that's not permissible and that that's not the way to go. At least it's not approved by the highest authorities in their religions.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have. I'm Ray Hardman. From all of us at WNPR and CPTV, thanks for watching and listening to Front and Center.
Funding for Connecticut Public Broadcasting's Democracy Project is made possible by Newman's Own Foundation, which encourages everyone to think about, understand, and participate in the political process.